Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Panic at the Disco, Pray for the Wicked. So the fact that I have to cover this album, it's really a no-win situation for me. Might as well just lay that out right now just to establish where the discourse is going to be when talking about this album, regardless of its quality. And considering that I somehow wound up in the situation when posting reviews makes me lose subscribers in the short term, yeah, that's happening, I really have nowhere to go but down with this. And if all it sounds kind of sardonic and defeatist, well, it is in the former, but the larger truth is that I know regardless of what I say, there will be a die-hard fan base that'll stick up for whatever Brendon Urie and Panic at the Disco does. So even if I say how much A Fever You Can't Sweat Out has real gems, and Pretty Odd is legitimately great, and Vices and Virtues and Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die are both underrated, and how Crazy Equals Genius made my year-end list of the best songs of 2016, and I think there is at least something to Brendon Urie being compared to Brian Wilson, ultimately doesn't matter to them. If I'm remotely critical, I'm gonna get panned in this review. Hey, it's gonna happen. Go down in the comments. Prove me wrong. But frankly, given how I reviewed Death of a Bachelor 2 years ago, you should all know all this about me by now. So let's focus on Pray for the Wicked, where I covered a few of the lead-off singles on Billboard Breakdown, but I can't say I remember all that much about them. I remember the production sounding really overblown and thin, not remotely a good sign, and about the last thing that Brendon Urie would want to carry over from his Broadway productions. And I remember the lyrics feeling underweight, and the buzz was lukewarm, suggesting that was pretty commonplace across the album, but Panic at the Disco in every single incarnation has found ways to surprise me, and I was genuinely hoping that Pray for the Wicked would manage to hit something in that point, so alright, how is the album? Let's not mince words here, people. This is easily Panic at the Disco's worst album. More even than that, it's Panic at the Disco's least interesting album, which might actually be the bigger crime here for me as a reviewer. Yeah, you might take issue with the wild shifts of previous records, but Pray for the Wicked suffers the most because it doesn't really take many of those chances across the board, which leaves us with a severely undercooked and underweight but simultaneously overblown pop album that if I didn't have confirmation that Brendon Urie was rushing certain songs before the label deadline, I would have called it anyway. So yeah, not precisely terrible, but far from good here. So let's start off with some of that, specifically in the compositions and the production. Now, some of you might not know this, but I'm actually a big fan of musical theater, and thus I wasn't immediately averse to the big band horn sections and the flashy opulence. Brendon Urie has always drawn inspiration from that old school Frank Sinatra era, and this might be the first record where he has really doubled down on a lot of those influences. And I wish somebody had told Jake Sinclair this, his producer, because so much of this production work does not click at all, and there's no good reason for that. And this goes far beyond the running understanding that many music critics have when talking about musicals that the cast records are rarely all that well produced. But this is a case of cranking up the tempos and overstuffing the arrangement with clattering snares and multi-tracking and blaring horns, and then compressing all of it. We'll come back more to that, but if you're not paying attention to the bass groove, you won't even hear it half the time, probably even more than half, and even then, it feels like the record is doubling down on the mid to high registers to produce the most shrill, grating blast of trumpet and saxophone you're ever gonna get. And that's before you tack on the pitch shifting and the vocal samples, and very little that actually showcases some modulation to let these songs breathe. Now, I might find the hook of High Hopes really grating. The vocal compression on Brendon Urie's voice is flat out awful, but at least the verses in the pre-chorus gives the song a bit of space, which does not happen for tracks like Dancing's Not a Crime with all of its shrill vocal samples, or how much King of the Clouds tries to ascend into these agonizingly overwrought high notes. This is the song Brendon Urie reportedly rushed, and with how sloppily blended it really feels, especially around the vocals, yeah, you can kind of tell. It's actually one reason the piano ballad Dying in LA, the closing track, it's probably one of the better cuts here, because Brendon Urie is still a really good performer that when the arrangements have a little bit more restraint to let that come through, he really does shine there. It's probably one of the best songs here to close out the record. But beyond that, the only two songs I can see myself returning to are Say Amen Saturday Night, thanks to its crushing hook, and really despite the clusterfuck of samples, and the Overpass, which has some of the best horn pickups on the record, and while the percussion feels incredibly overmixed, it's got kind of a feel of like a James Bond theme, and I mean that as a compliment. It also has a guitar on its verses, which for the record, it's the minority on this album. You'll hear more trap breakdowns than actual rock elements here. Mostly it's just peripheral to hold on to some vestige of a groove like on one of the drums, or more acoustic texture that shows up on Roaring Twenties and Old Fashioned, in the latter case actively shunted behind the trap hi-hats and the arranged elements. And that's before we even consider the synthesizers, and at this point, I have to ask the question why Brendon Urie wanted this beyond just another layer to potentially modernize the sound. But when you get flattened tones that would sound more appropriate on an Eric Taxon album driving the melody of Hey Look at My Made It, it doesn't fit. I'm sorry. For as annoying as that seedy tone is on Roaring Twenties, it at least kind of made sense with the retro Broadway vibe with a little bit more of that vaudeville shtick. But when you get the increasingly synthetic layering in the vocals on One of the Drunks and King of the Clouds, it doesn't complement anything, and it doesn't fit with the style Brendon Urie's going for. This is where I'm inclined to point more fingers at Jake Sinclair for failing to layer any of this in a way to prioritize a stable melody line outside of the vocals right at the front of the mix, and then over-compressing everything. But it's like in the search for bombast, nobody told Brendon Urie that contrast and crescendos are what you need to emphasize dramatic weight, and just going full force all the time with more layers leads to a rather one-dimensional, oversoul, and yet messy experience. And this wouldn't be a huge issue if it didn't feel like Brendon Urie completely phoned in the lyrics. And if we're looking for the biggest disappointment with Pray for the Wicked, and really for Panic at the Disco as a whole, it's here. Because it feels painfully stretched and undercooked. Like Fall Out Boy's Mania, an act with a reputation for overwritten but ultimately pretty satisfying content is just run out of interesting things to say. Most of the record is celebratory, inspirational pablum you could hear from any other pop song, and while it tries to get a little cute about it, like on Hey Ma, I Made It and Roaring Twenties, and showing how that reckless lifestyle might have some consequences, the poetry is nowhere close to being as interesting or unique or sharp. But even the attempts to satirize the party feel kind of hypocritical for Panic at the Disco. One of the Drunks plays in this territory by showing how draining and numb alcohol abuse can be, but when you surround that song with Say Amen Saturday Night with how celebratory that song is, or especially the more wistful yearnings of Old Fashioned, kind of lose a lot of resonance in the album context. And the frustrating thing is that this record actually does nail some of that draining struggle for fame and popularity on Dying in LA. Hell, I'd argue the song has more earned pathos than the entire album, and as a closer, it really does save the record by giving you a more ambiguous conclusion. It's not in the same tier as Charles Kelly's Leaving Nashville or Caitlin Smith's This Town Is Killing Me, but it's at least in the same ballpark, and as a closer, it really connected for me. But as a whole, folks, the feeling I get from this record is Brendon Urie trying his damnedest to sell a dream with weight and deeper meaning for him, but it simultaneously feels like it's trying way too hard and yet not hard enough. The production is completely oversold to the point where outside of the vocal line you can barely find your thoughts or cohesive melody amidst the overstuck mixes full of shrillness and compression, and yet when you actually look at the lyrics that are being sold in this way, they feel increasingly thin and inconsequential, not even leaning into the melodrama that you could have sold this with. Oh, the last thing you want for so much bombast. And ultimately, when you factor in some really weak underlying grooves and a lack of truly striking moments that weren't just shrill as all hell, I'm stuck giving this an extremely light 5 out of 10 because this is barely passable. If you're a diehard fan, well hell, you've already left your comment down below. I already called that. But otherwise, no, I'm sorry. This is mediocre at best and will likely be forgotten very, very quickly. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine this review is going to piss some of you off. I'm sorry folks, I wanted to like this. I wanted to think Panic at the Disco has had hope. I've stuck up for this band so many times in the past, and this was just a real letdown. They have done so much better. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you want to buy the record, links down in the description below. Got the poll up there for all you to tell me how wrong I am, especially you die-hard fans, because I know you're just going to hop down to the comments and do it anyway. Sorry, folks, I wish I was on your side. I wanted to like it. But hey, anything else I might be able to do, I'd be more than ears. If you guys want to help support this channel or add to my schedule, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.